Hello YouTube, Dave here again, back with another fantastic locations review. This is the third video in the series, and today we're going to be taking a look at what I believe to be the most unique of the fantastic locations products that Wizards of the Coast released back in the day. So the Fantastic Locations, if you're not familiar, was a tie-in product with the D&D minis, like the plastic pre-painted miniatures game where you would buy booster packs of miniatures. They usually had between 8 to 12 minis, depending on if it was a starter set or not. They were randomized plastic minis that you just collect and sort of build war bands around. Fantastic Locations includes some scenario information for the miniatures game, as well as a couple of double-sided poster maps that you can use for playing the D&D miniatures game, but it also comes with a module included for the actual role-playing game. So we've looked at the Fane of the Drow Fantastic Locations product, as well as the Hellspike Prison adventure, or the Fantastic Location product. Today we're looking at the Frostfell Rift. So the adventure portion is a 14 to 15 page module, but this one has a little bit of a twist. Now this is actually originally released back in December, I believe. Let's just have a look here. Yeah, December of 2006, and like all old school module products, the cover isn't actually attached to anything. It just houses all the stuff, and it was shrink wrapped. So you have the maps here. I'm not going to fold them both out because I just don't have room to do that, but they are reproduced on the inside of the cover. So when we look at a location, I will show you the map that goes along with it. Now, like I said, this is a very unique product in the Fantastic Locations series, and one of the more unique adventures products period released for the 3rd edition D&D role-playing game. So where the other two Fantastic Location products in the series that I looked at so far, those were more like your traditional modules. They were short, they were sort of to the point, they were a bit condensed. You as a DM, you may want to fill them out a little bit, but you were intended to run them from the the first encounter to the last encounter as just one continuous story. There weren't any breaks in between. They were designed for a specific level of player characters, and they would progress. So like Hellspike Prison, I believe you had a group of 9th level characters, and I think Fane of the Drow, it was a group of 4th or 5th level characters. What's interesting about this one is it's more of a collection of individual encounters that you can use to fill out your own campaign. So this is more of like a campaign seed product, or a very bare bones campaign arc, but it is a very interesting one at that. So the overall premise, or the way you'd want to introduce these or use these particular adventures, at least to follow the story outlined by the product itself, would be to have the players in a campaign where they're sort of going up against the forces of chaos, in particular worshippers of the god of slaughter, Erythnol. So this is sort of like the overarching thread of the campaign, or at least a significant section of a campaign. This could be a side story that you sort of come back to every once in a while, or it could be the main driving force of your campaign. But this is a booklet that is designed for encounters from encounter level 4 up to encounter level 18, although I think the highest encounter level is actually 17 in the book, but it says from range 4 to 18. Now, that's encounter level, and the encounter level formula in 3rd edition was notoriously bad. So for example, you have 4 challenge rating 1 creatures with 7 hit points each in the very first encounter, and they still claim that that's an encounter level 4. Like that would be, a moderate challenge for 4th level characters, and it would not be. So what I'm going to do is tell you what the encounter level is, and then sort of give you what I would recommend as the actual level that the players would be in. Typically, the players are going to be a level or 2 below the encounter level, just because, again, the encounter level formula was pretty sketchy. So the adventure, or the product, takes place in the location in the northern reaches of whatever your campaign world that you're using. It could be a specific one from a particular campaign, but as written here, it is a location known as the Skyfrost Mountain Range. And the particular location was sort of a pocket of civilization where, you know, player characters could exist and where you could have like your typical like goblinoids or cultists operating as well, is a location known as the Scarage Vale. So it's one of like the isolated pockets of civilization, sort of at the very edge of civilization, or you could say on the borderlands of known civilization. That reference should become very clear a little bit later on. But yeah, so what we actually have here are several encounters that use and reuse the two double-sided poster maps. I think each map has at least two uses throughout the course of this particular product. So yeah, the basic background involves the forces of chaos that were once sort of ruled by a Merilith demon by the name of Olgundra. However, she ended up disappearing some time ago, and the forces of chaos fell to infighting and sort of collapsed in on themselves before they were ultimately, you know, vanquished or driven back, their plans foiled by a group of pesky adventurers that came from the south. Now, like I said, this is sort of a campaign arc, so there's no real plot hook to set things up. Each of the encounters has a section called Continuing Story, and it's typically two paragraphs, with the first paragraph sort of being the setup, the reason why the player characters might be going to that particular location, and then the second paragraph is usually like the fallout from what happens once the encounter is completed. So the very first encounter takes place at a location known as the Black Library. So the Black Library is this top map here. On the right-hand side, we have the ground floor of the library, and then we have the upper floor on the left-hand side. So that is the map that we use for this particular encounter. The setup for it is that the player characters are making their way to the library for some sort of purpose, research, or they may just have a tome that they're looking to sell or to turn in to a location that's sort of known for having a vast collection of books on history, you know, the occult, you know, stuff like that. However, before the characters actually get to the library, a band of goblins was dispatched by the cult of Erythnol to collect some tomes on various like rituals and histories concerning the cult and the forces of chaos in the region. And they were also tasked with killing the librarians and basically burning the library to the ground. By the time the players show up and enter the library, the cultists have killed off all but two of the librarians, and they have yet to set fire to the actual building itself. So the player characters fight a group of these cult sneaks, which are composed of goblin rogues, and it is it says encounter level 4. Now again, you're looking at 4 one-hit dice creatures. I mean, yes, they have sneak attack, which is, you know, okay. And they have some okay items as well, but this is an encounter that you'd really want your players to be probably only like first to second level. Third level might be pushing it a little bit. It might be a little bit too much of an easy encounter if the player are third level. So I would recommend for first or second level characters, you know, because again, the goblins have some okay abilities. But they're still, you know, there's still 7 hit point creatures, like a 1-hit die creature. So yeah, you know, second level is what I'll settle on. I think this is a good encounter for second level, because again, the players are probably going to have all of their hit points, all of their resources available to them before they enter this fight. But, you know, they enter the library, they fight the cultists. If some of the goblins are defeated, the remaining ones will try to set fire to the library and then will try to flee. The player characters have the opportunity to save 2 of the librarians because the goblins haven't had a chance to kill them yet. And these 2 librarians, Edgin and Molira, Molira. Fantasy names are messed up. I don't know. Anyway, the librarians will actually offer to assist the player characters in the future, basically in anything that they might need help with. So the Black Library is sort of meant to be a reoccurring location throughout the course of the campaign. So the players, it's not like a base of operations, but it's a place that they probably go to regularly if they need information, if they need stuff about local history, or if they might be, sort of lost on what to do next. They may find something at the library to sort of help them with. So it's good to sort of have that early contact or early place that they can sort of rely on. The fallout from this is that the cult really didn't want the library to be there. They didn't want, any record of what was, taken or anything like that to be left behind. So you could design a few other encounters or adventures where the cultists do try to, like, make good on their wish to destroy the library. So that's sort of like the follow-up that you can use for that. You could have a couple of other attacks before the cult finally just gives up and moves on to something else. So that's sort of the very first encounter that we have here. The second encounter, which is designed for encounter level 5. So again, you probably want the characters to be, 3rd level. I don't think you'd want to go too much higher than that because they are fighting just a single creature here. But they are going to a location known as Hailstorm Tower, which is this map right here. So again, it's contained within the mountains. You have the remains, you have the tower, which is basically the remains of some larger complex that has long since been destroyed. Only the tower, single room of this location actually remains today. But what we actually have here is the player characters are they're going there. I guess the main thing is just on a quest of discovery. They may be sent to locate Hailstorm Tower itself. They may just be sent to survey the mountains, but they actually encounter a gargoyle guardian of the Hailstorm Tower that is in league with the cultists of Erythnol. So the players basically, fight off the gargoyle. And the actual tower itself is completely encased and filled with ice. So at this point in the campaign, it's just a location that the players discovered. It does have a role later on. Like I said, all of these maps get revisited at some point throughout this product. And by the time they return to it, they have access to the actual tower itself. But to begin with, they just discover it and they fight off the gargoyle. It should be implied that there are more gargoyles in the area, so the players probably don't necessarily want to hang around. And again, I think, 3rd level, for this one is probably the way to go. You could probably also make the characters 4th level, but for encounter level 5, a single creature, it does have damage reduction, which is something that can make it difficult for the fighter characters, but it's just negated by magic. So by the time the players get there, your fighters should have magic weapons or someone that can cast magic weapon on them. So I would recommend this for 3rd or 4th level characters. I would aim, again, primarily for 3rd, but if you want them to have to fight their way back, or if you wanted them to encounter more than one gargoyle, then have them, 4th level. Just let them fight them sort of one at a time. The next encounter we have here is Unstable Footing, and this takes us to the Frostfell Rift map, which we have here. It's also the namesake of the adventure itself. And the premise for this is that there was a group of pilgrims that were bringing supplies to the Black Library. They could be tomes, they could be scrolls, they could just, just something that, was being brought to the library to help it out, but they've gone missing. So the characters have to actually go and discover what actually caused it. And what caused it was a group of white spawn hordlings. So dragon spawn are creatures that are sort of created or they're twisted from other creatures that are sort of they have like draconic blood introduced to them. The white spawn hordlings are about the size of kobolds, and they're sort of like, they're humanoid shaped, like they have 2 arms, 2 legs, no wings, sort of thing. They're really cool creatures, and there's a few other dragon spawn creatures that we see like in other like monster manuals and stuff like that from back at the time. But these ones, again, they're the white spawn, so they're connected to like the cold, but they're also in line with the cultists as well, and they actually, are the ones that ended up slaughtering the pilgrims. But the players can sort of get there and hopefully get the items that the pilgrims were bringing to the library. But that's sort of where we come there. The fallout from this, basically, the cult sort of becomes a little bit more aware of the player characters at this point, but again, nothing serious. It's something where, their names may come up a few times, but there's no immediate reprisals. So basically, this is sort of, you have this event take place, but it doesn't necessarily feel like it's directly connected to the overarching theme immediately. You may have to sort of come back to figuring that out a little bit later. The next scenario is, oh, sorry, I guess I should mention the level range for that. So this is an encounter level 7. You have 6 challenge rating 2 creatures. Again, this is something that I would probably have the players be around 5th level for. Counter level 7 sounds high for 5th level characters, but it's really not. Especially if you have, characters that have fire-based spells, which if you're in a campaign setting where there's a lot of, cold-based creatures are going to. These things take double damage from fire, and if you have access to Fireball, that could make for a very quick encounter. So yeah, I wouldn't have them any higher than 5th. You might also be able to get away with a 4th level group going against these guys, just to sort of cut back on the chances of the players having a Fireball to sort of nuke the encounter to begin with. So 4th to 5th is what I'd recommend, and I wouldn't go any higher or necessarily lower than that. So the next encounter is Hunters Hunted. This is an encounter level 8, and this is the first location, or the first encounter that utilizes the Caves of Chaos map. So a few years ago, I did a video talking about, I believe it was sort of comparing the design premises behind B2, Keep on the Borderlands for the D&D Basic Expert system, to the Tomb of Horrors. And in that video, I actually had a map for the Caves of Chaos displayed, and people were asking me where that map came from. So this is the answer. The Caves of Chaos map came with the Frostfell Rift. Now, it doesn't actually, like this is the map here. You don't get a ton of locations, so you get a bit of the wilderness here, and then you get sort of another location that you can use later on. That again, so the players are really encountering out here for this first one. The basic setup for this one is the players are simply just too close to the Caves of Chaos. They may be there seeking stuff out deliberately, or they may just be traveling from one location to another when they get a little bit too close, and they get attacked by the Cult of Chaos's or the Cult of Erythnal's favorite allies, a Minotaur Ranger and his Dire Lion animal companion. So what's really cool about this particular encounter is that it involves a Minotaur and the Caves of Chaos. And if any of you have played through B2, there were a lot of really cool, memorable encounters in that particular adventure, but in my opinion, the most memorable of the encounters had to be with the Minotaur. The Minotaur was sort of like if you turned a corner and encountered this thing, then you messed up. And I actually remember years ago, it was a little over a decade ago now, a friend of mine started running the Caves of Chaos for Basic Expert. So it wasn't even Rule Cyclopedia, it was like the basic rules, the Mold of A basic rules. And I joined for a couple of sessions. I made an elf. It didn't go very well, obviously. Definitely didn't get to second level. But I do remember us encountering the Minotaur. And I always thought it was a TPK, but I think what just ended up happening was it definitely killed my character. But I don't think I think everybody else actually managed to get away. But it was a really cool encounter. And it's just really neat to see the Caves of Chaos, even though you don't explore the whole thing here, although you could for the campaign, because, this is a campaign seed adventure, a campaign arc. So there's a lot of different stuff that you could use, and you could use the Caves of Chaos definitely for other adventures. But this particular encounter, it just made me kind of feel nostalgic for that. And it's just really, really cool. So this is an encounter level 8, and you do have some pretty decent, beefy monsters here. I would say that you probably want the players to be around 6th level, maybe 6th to like 7th at the high end. But again, once you get to 7th level, you're also getting the 4th level magic. So I would recommend this for 6th level characters. But it would definitely be a decent fight. Like, this would be a tough fight for the players. But again, this does feel like something where they would have access to all of their hit points, all their class abilities, all their spells. So, don't be afraid to throw a tough fight against the players. But 6th level seems like a good place for this particular one. And again, just it involves the Caves of Chaos, which is really cool. This is the first moment where the cult, though, if the Minotaur and Lion are defeated or killed off by the player characters, um, this is the first time where the cult really develops a dislike for the players. You know, before their involvement could have been viewed as just coincidental, or they just happened to be, you know, in the right place at the wrong time, sort of thing. But this is the first time where the cult really starts to take things personally against the player characters. And they actually will send out assassins to deal with the player characters, which brings us to the next encounter, which brings us also back to the Black Library. So this is an encounter with the Weird Sisters. This is an encounter level 9. Again, you probably want this to be relatively shortly after the encounter with the Minotaur. Again, I think a good place for the characters to be would probably be against 6th or 7th level. They are going up against 2 CR7 creatures, which we'll talk about them a little bit more here in a second. But, you know, again, I probably wouldn't go much higher than 7th level, because the even though there's 2 NPCs that will have some buff spells and be ready for the fight, the players are still likely to outnumber them 2 to 1 or more. So, you know, try to keep the actual player levels within, you know, like within 1 or 2 of the encounter level number that they give here. So I would run this for a group of 7th level characters. And if I wanted to go a little bit higher, if I wanted them to be 8th level, then I would probably throw in a 3rd combatant as well. Now, again, what's interesting about, well, I'll get into sort of that a little bit later, but the Weird Sisters, as they're stated here, they actually just sort of initially, you know, come into the library when the player characters are present. Just sort of, you know, case the joint sort of thing. So they'll speak with the player characters, they'll sort of interact with the librarians. What these individuals are is they are female half-fae, so they're humans with fae blood in their system. And so one of them, Laura Grawl, is a human favored soul. So a favored soul is a sort of like the divine version of a sorcerer. So they cast their spells spontaneously, the way that a sorcerer does, but they draw from the divine spell list instead of from the arcane spell list or the wizard sorcerer spell list. They have their own, but basically they're all like divine spells. So we have that, and then the other sister is Begalia Grawl, and she is a half-fae human warlock. So again, sort of interesting stuff here. Now, while they're interacting with the players and the librarians, they have access to certain abilities like charm, suggestion. I don't think dominate's one of them, but I think it's like charm person, suggestion. You know, things to basically manipulate the situation. And then they sort of leave as they kind of set stuff up. So they'll try to charm a player character who will be more intent on trying to save the lives of the librarians when the fight inevitably breaks out, instead of actually wanting to fight the sisters themselves. And then the librarians will sort of be charmed or have the suggestion spell cast on them in such a way that when the fight does break out, they sort of just get in the way. Like, they don't, again, fight anybody, they don't attack anyone, but they just sort of will become a nuisance, basically, as the encounter breaks out. So when the Weird Sisters leave after casing the joint and, you know, grooming the situation with their spells and preparing to actually fight, they go out, they cast some preparatory spells on themselves, and they come back with invisibility cast on them. And they actually come back by going through the windows of the upper floor and then making their way back down to attack the players there. So again, it's a really cool fight. They have some preparatory spells, you know, cast on themselves before the fight breaks out. So, you know, this is a pretty decent fight. It's always kind of cool to have spellcasters attack the players, or an encounter with spellcasters when they're prepared and they're powered up and they're ready to go. Instead of spending the first few rounds casting those buff spells on themselves, they have them and they're ready to go. And they'll cast things like Bull Strength on themselves. I think there's like, I want to say like Mage Armor, maybe not Mage Armor, but it gives their, let's see, their tactics here. Let's see, what spells do they cast on themselves? protection from law, entropic warding, bull strength, invisibility, protection from good. So they'll have, quite a few things on themselves to make the fight a little tougher. But again, a really cool idea. I love spellcasters actually being prepared. This is just a really cool encounter, and it's a direct result of the characters dealing with the Minotaur previously, so it does tie together nicely. This is the closest thing to a direct little module that we have, where it feels like one thing does lead into the next. So again, really, really cool here. So after the attack, it says the characters have reason to find out who's after them and why. So this is sort of where the players become really aware of the cult of Erythnol and what they're up to. All right, the next encounter takes us back to the Hailstorm Tower, where the characters fight a group of ice gaunts. So ice gaunts are, they're humanoids, they're ice-based humanoids. They're actually from a supplement called Frostburn, and I will admit I don't own that book. This is one of the few books for 3.5 that I didn't pick up. It's one that I'd love to get at some point because it is missing from my collection. I don't know a whole ton about them, but essentially when the tower was being excavated, these creatures were sort of awakened from the ice, and they ended up killing the people that were excavating the site. And this is sort of where the player characters arrive. So in the tower itself, there is a magic circle, which you can sort of see right there. And so the ice gaunts are sort of using it to channel unholy energies, unholy magic, to conduct rituals to aid the cult of Erythnol. So again, it's all sort of connected together. And then we have the next, oh, sorry, I keep forgetting to do this. So the Dead of Winter is an encounter level 12. We have 3 challenge rank 6 creatures with 1 challenge rank 11 creature. Again, I think that, 10th level characters would be pretty decent. I would even maybe go as low as level 9. You have some really decent, creatures here, but again, they're vulnerable to fire. So something that the player characters are likely going to have access to, especially if the campaign takes place in this northern region, like exclusively. So, these things are tough. They have spellcasting abilities. They definitely have a lot of stuff that they can throw at the player characters, and it is definitely going to be a tough fight. But at the same time, they have weaknesses as well that can be, pretty easily exploited based on the location that they're at, and the players are going to take advantage of 100%. You don't go to a location that was formerly frozen over in a frigid mountain range without fire magic. So I would say 9th level, maybe 10th. There is, the fact that the location's, so cold that it could have effects on the player characters. You may go up as high as 10th. But again, encounter level 12, I wouldn't go any higher than 10th level for this particular encounter. So the next encounter is Stone and Blood. So this is where the players actually take the fight directly to the cult of Erythnol, and you actually return back to the Caves of Chaos, where you fight a group of bugbear cultists. These are berserkers, so they're basically barbarians. But the player characters are going there to not only deal with the cult, but to also destroy their sacred idol, which is a stone golem, or a rock golem, in this case a blood rock golem, of Erythnol. So it's sort of encountered again. If we take a look at the map, so we've got the cave itself. So this is where the blood golem would be, and this is where the bugbears would be. So the first encounter really takes place on the outside. You have where the PC start is sort of within this region. The second one, we're actually going into the caves, and the players start here, and you can have sort of the bugbears and stuff placed throughout. But this is where they surround, and this is where they fight the golem itself. So this like it says here, the time has finally come for the PCs to confront the heart of Erythnol's resurging cult, a pack of vicious bugbears. With the destruction of the idol and the death of the bugbears, the characters break the back of the cult in the Skyfrost Mountains, while the Mennies, I think because the Menny is like a nickname for Erythnol, while the church thrives elsewhere, it fails to establish a foothold in the north. However, the PCs can't rest easy because Erythnol's high priest receives omens informing them of the players' actions. No doubt the heroes must deal with the agents of Erythnol in future adventures. So this is sort of where they, take out the main cult in the area. This is an encounter level 15. The golem is a challenge rank 13 creature. and you've got 6 level 9 berserkers. So again, it's going to be probably a pretty decent fight for challenge rating 15. I would say for this one, you'd want the players to be around 13th level. Golems tend to be pretty nasty. They have damage reduction that can only be negated by adamantine weapons, which the players may or may not have access to for the martial characters. They have immunity to magic, so this is something where, again, you'd want them to be a little closer to... in fact, this is one where you might even consider having the characters be, 14th. 15th level might be pushing it, because that's, again, pretty high level. They will have access to pretty high level stuff, and that would make the cultists feel a lot more trivial. But this is something I would say probably 14th level characters would be the best way to go here. Because the barbarians are tough, they can take a few hits, they can deal out some damage, but that golem is going to be pretty nasty. And with the golem defeated, again, that sort of breaks the back of the cult in the region, but we're not quite done yet. Because the final encounter takes us back to the Frostfell Rift. The premise for this one is that the characters, like, even though they defeated the cult, there's still disappearances happening, there's still unexplained events taking place, and a librarian at the Black Library runs across an obscure reference to Olgundra and her cult. It seems that the Merilith took powerful cultists to face devils in the Frostfell Rift and never returned. So it's possible that something to do with that is connected to the disappearances. Eventually the characters make their way to the Rift, where they fight the Collector. So the Collector is an ice devil, or a Gulagon or a Gelugon devil, and it's sort of the Collector basically encases demons and powerful enemies in ice and has them as his sort of macabre collection. However, these creatures aren't actually dead. They're just simply, in like a form of stasis, basically. So after fighting the Collector and dealing with that and killing the Collector, the magic that encased Olgundra, the Merilith, weakens to the point where she escapes, and the final encounter of this scenario is against the Merilith herself, a challenge rating level 8 or challenge level 17 creature. The Collector is advanced up to a challenge rating 17 as well. The encounter level for this is 17, and it's a pretty good guideline, I think, overall for the players to go up against, because again, there's some slight differences in the damage reductions and resistances of the creatures. I would recommend this for a group of 16th level characters, 15th at the lowest, I would say. And again, you can always throw in a few minion creatures and stuff like that as well. Again, you probably want to include an adventure around each of these, so the players may or may not have access to their full resources. If these encounters take place at the end of adventures that you design, then again, you want to adjust your levels, because the players aren't going to have necessarily their full resources. But if they're going into this as a singular fight and they have access to everything, 16th level characters I would recommend for this encounter. But yeah, and that's sort of the basics of this particular product. So that was the final encounter. So it says here, for the continuing the story, says even when the PCs defeat the Collector, they may not have truly cleansed the Mountain of Evil, so there are other forces that could exist in the mountains for the players to go up against. And we've introduced devils at the end here, so we had the forces of chaos, but now we also have evil forces of absolute law that may be at work here as well, and they were actually able to capture the leader, one of the heads of this chaos cult in the first place. So it definitely leaves the door open for for you to conclude a decent campaign on. So that was the Frostfell Rift, and like I said, it was a very different product from the others. The others were very simple, straightforward adventures where you just sort of, in the reviews, I mainly just focused on like the main details and not necessarily going to all of the encounters themselves. But this one, because it's not an actual module, it's just a collection of encounters for you to use, dispersed through an entire campaign. I felt that I had to go into a little bit more detail on each of the encounters. Now, overall, this is probably, and I think I've said this with the other ones, but I think overall, and including the ones that come after this, I think this is sort of my favorite of the Fantastic Locations adventures, and I feel like it captures the feel of something that's called Fantastic Locations, a little bit more than a singular cohesive module really does. This gives you the framework to build an entire campaign around, whereas the others were, a singular adventure that would take place within the confines of a campaign, either as filler or something that you sort of build into and then have to, build up on after, going through the module. But this gives you encounters from characters that could be, first to second level up to like 15th, 16th, or 17th level characters. And that's a pretty broad range for a campaign. Honestly, you only have a few other, like 3 more levels of progression after that, really, to finish a campaign off with. So it's a really interesting product because it does give you some seeds to work off of. It gives you some locations to use and to sort of build your own lore around. This is something that I would probably not recommend for this isn't something that you buy to run as just a singular module. You could obviously cherry pick the adventure or the encounters and drop them into your adventure as you see fit. But this is really something that feels like it's meant to be the framework for a larger campaign. And honestly, I would have to say that it's the most underdeveloped of the products because, again, it's such a wide-reaching product. Like, it's not a cohesive module like we've seen with the past ones, and I'm pretty sure that the next 2 that I have are the same way. They're actual adventures, whereas this one really felt like it was the premise of a campaign that was going to be told over maybe like a larger booklet, or maybe like a series of booklets, or maybe even something that could have appeared in like a dungeon magazine, or like an idea that may have been floated for an adventure path that just never got picked up on. It's hard to say, but it's something that's really interesting in concept, and I like the fact that it reuses the maps for several different encounters, and you can actually see progression from some of the different locations when you visit them first time to when you visit them the second time. Like, for example, the Hailstone Tower, or Hailstorm Tower, the tower location, essentially. It starts as just frozen block that the players really can't access, but they know there's something there. To having awakened like the undead spirits of like these druid protectors, these ice-based humanoids that are, again, connected to the cult. And it's just a really interesting premise overall. I really kind of wish that they had more pages to work with. Like, this is something that probably should have been like 120 page super adventure, or whatever, super module or mega module, whatever you wanted to call them. That they had something like City of the Spider Queen, or the Red-Handed Doom. Like, this feels like something that really should have been expanded on a lot more. Should have had more room to really build on, because it's a really cool premise. It brings back the Caves of Chaos, which is great fan service without necessarily totally rehashing, Keep on the Borderlands, but it references it. The players can go in, they can explore part of the cave, and they go back to it later on to deal with the forces of chaos directly there. Just, again, really, really interesting, fascinating product overall, but definitely not something that you pick up thinking that it's going to be a module. So where the other ones were modules, this is a booklet of individual encounters that are connected, but not directly from one to the other. There's a couple of situations where you could run one directly after the other, like the fight with the Minotaur, followed by the assassins being sent for the player characters in the wake of that. Like, that could definitely be sort of like one after the other, but for the most part, these are encounters that are either meant to start an adventure, or maybe culminate at the end of an adventure, or they're just sort of like one-offs that push the plot forward, even if you don't want to build a whole adventure or complex around. But it's not a module in the sense that we have. This is a campaign arc product. This is a campaign seed product, because really you're only getting small snippets that you can use to build a larger story around. But it's cool. I love the idea of giving you something that you can build on. And this is something where you could literally build an entire campaign off of this 15-page booklet, right? This 15-page scenario. You could actually design an entire campaign around, and that's just really awesome. That's really cool, pardon the pun, which was fully intended, by the way. So that's Frostfell Rift. Unfortunately, this one is not currently available on DM's Guild. I couldn't find it in PDF or print form. I do hope that they, fix that and that it is something that does become available, because it is a really cool, it's a really cool product. It's really interesting. And it's just a great, way to, build a campaign, using this product. Just again, really interesting. You can't run it from cover to cover the way you did the other ones. It's more of a slow burn, but it is a really awesome product. It's a really interesting one, and it's one that I wish they would have had more opportunity to build on and expand and have a larger module booklet to work with. But it is what it is, and what it is a pretty cool collection of encounters that you can build an entire level 1 through 20 D&D campaign around, and that's pretty sweet. Anyway, thank you guys very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I know this was a bit longer than the other Fantastic Locations Adventure reviews. The next ones will probably be back to around 12 to 15 minutes, but there was a lot more we had to talk about because each of the encounters really needed to have some explaining done, whereas the other ones you just sort of like, this location, the players, this is why they're there, this is what they find at the end, and that's sort of it. This one you really need to go into detail with all the encounters, but it's a really cool product. Like I said, it's probably my favorite of the Fantastic Locations, and it's a really interesting premise for an adventure-based product to just be this collection of encounters that you have to expand upon yourself. So awesome stuff. Anyway, thank you guys very much for watching. Let me know in the comments below if, as a DM, you ran any of the encounters within Frostfell Rift, or if you just used the maps, if you actually built a campaign around it. That would be really cool as well. So thank you guys very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next time. Take care.